What I'd like you to do is look at business investment, which is going to be 4.1, and I'd like you to look at inventories, which is going to be 4.2. So let's take a look at 4.1, non-defense capital goods. And what you can see there is that this is, it's a funny sounding title, but it makes sense. In other words, this is new orders for capital goods. What's that? Machinery. Only it's non-defense, non-military items. The idea being that these are expenditures, purchases by businesses of items that are not military and therefore have something to do with the economic cycle. Well, obviously, for instance, in the late 90s, it grew a lot, the dot-com boom. Then it fell a lot. We recovered to a point just a little bit higher than we were in the late 90s, and now you can see it's falling again. So, therefore, question: is the recession concentrated only in the consumer sector? The answer is no. It's obviously spread over to business, because business is not spending on new equipment the way it once did. Good or bad? Very bad, right? By the way, what about Silicon Valley? Well, this, of course, affects Silicon Valley, doesn't it? Because it also affects expenditures on software as well as hardware. By the way, are there any folks in Silicon Valley that make hardware? Of course, it isn't just all software, right? Intel makes a product, not a service. Cisco Systems makes a product, not a service, and other firms do, of course, too. All right? So this is troubling. And finally, when we take a look at inventories, once again, when firms are feeling optimistic, they build inventories. What are inventories? Inventories are stocks of goods on the shelf. If Nordstrom thinks it's going to sell, what's the way to sell? Well, you've got to get the stuff out on the racks, right? You can't hide it from people. It's got to be out there. And the same thing with any kind of business, right? If there's a housing boom, well, then the lumber companies are going to have large inventories of lumber. If there's a housing slump, the inventories shrink. You can see at the end of the dot-com boom, the inventories were growing. And then during the dot-com boom around 2001, look what happened to inventories. The latest cycle, inventories grew, and now look what's happening. The inventories are being liquidated. That's why the number is negative. In other words, you're not adding to stuff on the shelf, you're selling out. By the way, let me ask you this question. During an expansion, if firms build inventories, which will rise faster, sales or production, if the firms build inventories? Let me ask again. If during the expansion, which will rise faster, sales or production, if firms are building up their inventories? Mira. Production is going to rise faster because some of the product goes into inventory. Now, will that make the boom more robust or less robust? It'll make it more robust because production is going to grow that much faster and the stuff is going to go into inventories. Now, firms have a lot of motives for putting stuff into inventory. One is Like I said for Nordstrom, if it isn't on the if it isn't out there, you're not going to sell it. And the same thing with the lumber mill. If the big order comes in and you can't just say, well, wait while we run the mill, you've got to ship. Okay, so firms have their own motives. And by the way, let me ask you this question. If the price rises over time, then you might make a capital gain. You might make a capital gain on your inventories, right? You've produced it at a low price. It sits there, the value rises, and you sell it at a higher price. So there's all kinds of motives for building inventory, right? And you can understand that. But when the downturn happens, which falls faster, sales or production? Production. Because now you're liquidating your inventories and getting rid of all the stuff, so you stop production and get rid of all the stuff on the shelf. And so that makes the recession that much worse. Because the sales are falling bad enough, but now you reduce production, see? And of course, now when prices start to fall, that only sets in panic. People who were hoping prices go up and the value of inventory goes up, now they see it falling, and they just get rid of everything. See?
And they might have to book a loss.
They may have a loss, of course.
On the inventory.
That's right. You can make a loss on inventories. Absolutely. If it costs you X to produce it, and then you sell it for X minus something, then you make a loss just like you might have made a gain. So it can be very destructive.